Welcome, everybody, to our March episode of the Forest Health Workshop. I'm your moderator, Tony Seidel. We're joined, as always, by Dr. John Ball, your host. Today, we're discussing tree planting in South Dakota in the region, proper techniques, the do's and don'ts, including when and where and how. And as we were discussing, we're seeing warm temps already. It feels like spring as we turn into the calendar or the calendar season of spring. Trees are budding out all over the place. And now is the time for planting. So we're thrilled for you to join us. Hopefully you can learn something. This workshop is eligible for CEU, continued education credits or units for both International Society of Arboriculture arborists and certified American foresters. If you are either of those seeking a credential, please put your name and your uh, code, your certification number in the chat. I'll be sure to register those and get those over to the right people. For those master gardeners that are joining us, thank you for joining us. This does count towards your training hours that I believe are self-reported. So thank you so much for joining us. This workshop is being recorded. At the top of our chat box, I pasted a link to our workshop web or the YouTube playlist where we have almost 30 past workshops on there covering every single topic you could think about with trees in South Dakota and in the Great Plains. So again, we're thrilled to have you here. Please, if you have any questions, put those in the chat box as we should have some time at the end of the workshop to have a discussion here. So without further ado, Dr. Ball, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony. Great introduction and start there. And just a reminder for all those ISA certified arborists, as Tony mentioned, the change that came about a couple of times ago was that now ISA wants you to put it in the chat box, Tony to collect all this information, another task he gets to do, and then we'll get the CEUs in for you. All right. So, it might take a bit. Check in about 3 weeks if you want to be absolutely certain that it's pulled up on the ISA website. But with that, I'm going to get started. And the title of this one is Getting Ready for the Planting Season. But I got to start out with two questions that I receive every year from producers. So if we're looking at it from a windbreak perspective, you'll understand why I'm starting with windbreaks here in a moment. But why don't I hit the two questions I am just going to get hammered with fairly quickly? And that is, why is mortality higher for outplanting cedars and pines than outplanting hardwoods? For one of the things is I will get calls from people that will say, I had ponderosa pines planted this year, and they'll call me in the fall or even the following year and say, you know what, I had only about a 70% survival. And I'll say, you did something well, because it can be as low as 50%. And cedars, why they're incredibly tough plants, they don't transplant as well as you might think, and they're stressed by it too. But when you go, well, why is that? I mean, it's a general rule for conifers is that they don't have as high a survival. Now, is the survival good? Yes, certainly is. But it's not like hardwoods. And the reason is keep in mind that outplanting results in water deficits until the roots are growing in the soil and absorbing water. The minute you plant the conifer, it's already transpiring water quite a bit because it has the needles. Now, needles are tougher and thicker, so they don't transpire as a higher rate as a broadleaf leaf. But the middle, it's already evaporating out moisture. So you got to get moisture coming in. So that's one issue. Strategy for survival on these things. When you look at hardwoods, what can hardwoods do? They can die back. And that's not uncommon. That you go out there and you plant your hardwoods, maples, elm, hackberries, pick any species you want, that even when everything's done correctly and we have a reasonably good season, some of those trees are going to die back. It just is going to happen. But hardwoods can die back and recover. Conifers don't have adventitious buds the same way hardwoods do. And so not only are they losing moisture immediately, they can't recover by sprouting. I mean, a good example, if you cut a spruce to the ground, it is not sprouting back. Same with a cedar, pine. But if you cut off all the maple here, it'll sprout right back. And so it's just a general rule. It's not that you've done anything wrong. It's just expect a higher mortality with conifers than you would with hardwoods, even if everything goes well. And so I like to see a lot of hardwoods being planted that are fairly tough. I like box elder. I'm just going to mention that. It's particularly West River. This is one up in Corson County. They did some great plantings out there, and boy, here's a tough tree, and they can sprout back if they die a little bit. The other thing I get is on cedars, and I'm going to get it this year as well as the districts. You plant the cedars, particularly the eastern red cedar. You plant it and they turn a purplish brown after you plant them in the spring. It used to be I'd get these calls. Oh my gosh, you got to go out and look at these producers. Their cedars are turning brown, and we planted them a month ago or 6 weeks ago, and they're all upset. Now I go, call me in August. You know why? By August, they look fine. The color change is a response to the drought stress. It's kind of the same color that Eastern red cedar turn in the fall. They get a little bit of purplish brown in the fall. And that's normal. That's what they're supposed to be doing. And so a color change on Eastern red cedar and to a degree Rocky Mountain juniper is perfectly normal for transplanted trees. Now, if you want to know, is it just this color change that I'm talking about in response to stress, or is it dying? Well, what you want to do is go and just scrape a little of the bark. And if it's green underneath, tree's fine. Also, those little branchlets, if those are becoming brittle and breaking off, that's not a good sign. So if you go out there and you grab it and it's still soft and bends, a little bit of green underneath, but the color looks horrible, perfectly normal. It is drought stress, but of course it's going to be drought stress because it was just planted. And they recover. If instead it's brown underneath and the branchlets are breaking off, well, then there was a problem. And that should probably be addressed fairly early to figure out what was the problem. But a mere color change? No, wait on that one. All right. Well, as you might expect, I'm going to focus on bare root this time because container planting and balled and burlap planting are relatively simple compared to bare root. And we do bare root for homes. We do it on campus here quite a bit. And certainly we do it for windbreaks. There's a lot of advantages of planting trees bare root. It's less expensive. You're buying the plant. You're not buying the pot. You're not buying the bag. You're not buying the soil. You're just buying the plant. You also get better root development because the plant was growing in soil. The roots were expanding as they should, as opposed to spinning around in a pot. Or in some cases, we get the same problem in a balled and burlap bag. And this may sound surprising, but faster establishment. It truly is. And one big reason is there's no change in soil texture. If you buy a container plant, that container soil is quite different than the surrounding soil. And because of that textural difference, you're interrupting water movement, that interface. And we find the same issue with balled and burlap, where the plant is harvested in its own soil, and that soil is held together with burlap and a wire basket. And so, really, if everything's done properly, bare root gives you higher survival and a faster recovery. However, there are disadvantages to bare rootstock. You have a much narrower planting window in South Dakota, as we'll talk about. And not all species will tolerate being planted bare root. Magnolias, for example, large fleshy root, they won't tolerate it. Yews won't tolerate it. Some of the larches do not tolerate it at all, do far better in container. And even some of the nut trees do better as container or balled and burlap than they do as bare root. So why I would say you probably got 90% of your trees They can be planted either balled in burlap container or bare root, and bare root's going to be better if everything's done right. We do have maybe about 10% that just do not adapt well to being planted bare root. And I will say one of the biggest things is since the roots are open and exposed, more care is required during the planting process. So if you make a mistake, it's going to be a big one. Well, what's a spring look like for planting? It looks dry. Anyone here who looks out their window knows that. We could use some good soaking rains, and perhaps we'll get them. Our wettest months are ahead of us. And 3 months from now, we could be saying, boy, what a great growing season. And I hope we are. Right now, though, take a look at our drought intensity. If you're down there in the Yankton area, you just can't get lucky. This has been persisting for years. If you look at those lower counties there, and then you get out in the Southern Hills, same problem. It's already dry and it's moving up. Northern part of the state is still drought free. They went into winter in pretty good conditions. If you're sitting up in Brown or Marshall County or that, you're going, what's he talking about? But if you're down there in Clay County and Union County, Yankton, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is dry. Let's hope that changes. And I want to remind everybody, it's not spring yet. Wait for planting. This is something that occurs every year. We get a couple of nice days, and everybody wants to go out and do two things. They want to golf if they do that, and they want to plant all their trees right now. And I know everybody's eager to get out there and get the season started. We don't know what April's going to bring. We could be sitting here in a foot of snow in mid-April. I've seen us cancel classes the last week of April because of snow. But here's what we need for bare root. We need warm soils. The tree has to go in warm soils. And the reason for that is you got to have root growth start right away. It cannot wait. So those roots need to begin to grow and absorb water, particularly with conifers, because they've already got the needles on them that are transpiring, giving up moisture. But you also need cool air temperatures. Why? You would really like to delay the plant from leafing out. You'd like to delay the shoots from expanding. Why? Because that's where you're going to have a lot of moisture given off, that tender growth. And if you can delay that until the roots are established, that's perfect. So warm soils, cool air equals success in planting bare root stock, whether we're talking about a windbreak or we're talking about a tree in your yard. And again, for some that might say, well, I know we do that for windbreaks, but trees in my yards, you will save a lot of money and have better success. So I would certainly encourage you this year, if possible, to try to take a look at planting bare root stock. But I need roots to grow right away with bare root stock and so I need to have the conditions that are going to do that. And the conditions I need are soil temperatures between about 45 and 60 degrees. If the soils are not at 45, I do not recommend planting. The reason why is if you planted them now, for example, you go out there, break up the soil, you put that little seedling in, a bare root tree. By that, I mean even a hardwood or a conifer. You put it in the ground, the roots are not going to grow at all. The soils are too cold. But everything above ground is losing moisture. Even broadleaf trees, the maple, the hackberry you plant, it's still losing some moisture through its stem and through its buds. And with conifers, they're losing moisture through their buds and needles. And so essentially everything's going out, nothing is coming in. So don't plant too early. These warm days like today, 80 some degrees, sunny, a little bit of wind. Any new tree in the yard is just, or in a yard or in a windbreak is just not going to make it because you're planting them bare root. If they've been in the ground for a couple of years, they can tolerate this sort of thing, but not that first year. 61 to 75, that's kind of the sweet spot. About six. I mean, if I was in control of weather around here, I'd have a couple weeks of 62-degree soil temperatures and 62-degree air temperatures, and we'd have great success. Now, Don't plant bare root stock after it leaves out. Here was a whole bunch of trees that came in to one of the communities in South Dakota. And you can see they came from the cooler and they're already leafed out. And in other words, you can see how green the grass is. They were being planted way too late. Well, way too late means we have hot soil temperatures, okay? But we already have trees leafing off and giving off moisture. They are not going to make it. So we need to plant them while we still have cool air temperatures as well, because plants that are planted when it gets too hot, that young tender growth is so succulent, it just dries up and dies. And so we see these. These were some trees, bare root trees that went in at the end of June. End of June. Soils were warm, certainly. In fact, perhaps a little too warm. But there's no way you can grow roots fast enough to get all those leaves that are starting to come out or already out to survive. And so, great way to have trees fail. Exposure to 90-degree temperatures during leaf out, you can have 60% of mortality of the expanding leaves. And think of what today is. We're going to be in the 80s. Now we know it's going to cool down, thank goodness. But hot days and hot soils are not a great transplant success. Well, what about planting those trees? And I'll show you a little bit with the larger trees here. These are some of the coffee trees going in on campus last year. A reminder, you want to dig the hole 3 times wider. This is students. They dug the hole just wide enough. No, 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 no. Dig it wider. And the reason for that is now you fluffed up that soil. You haven't changed the texture, but you changed the structure. You opened it up more. But look at that root. That's a really nice root system going in. Now, keep in mind, being exposed to sun and drying like this, you don't want to leave it too long that way. I'm talking minutes that they can tolerate that, because you don't want those roots drying out. You want them to recover. So try to do this rather quickly. In the old days, 1700s, when this is the only way they transplanted trees, they transplant big trees this way, but they do it at night. Why? No ultraviolet light, cooler temperatures. I'm not saying do all your tree planting at 2 a.m. in the morning, but you don't want them exposed to hot sun for very long. The nice thing with bare root, you can establish the planting depth very easy. Um, there we put the rake across there. Do you see that little crook? On all your ornamental trees, some of the districts provide a lot of ornamentals, the 5, 6 foot trees. And if you're buying one of those as bare root again, you'll find there's a little crook at the bottom, because you can see it on a bare root tree. That crook needs to be above ground. In fact, you want to plant the tree so the first root, that pencil-sized root on stock this size, is just beneath the soil surface, just beneath. One problem with containers is it come too deep in the container. Another problem with the balled and burlap is it come too deep in the burlap. And so you really have to work to get the planting depth right for those two. Bare root's easy. You can see all the roots. So get that planting depth right. And what you want to see later on, obviously this is quite a ways, I want to see that crook still, where I can see the rootstock, what it was grafted onto, about 2 inches above the ground, maybe 3, depending on the plant, and the sign, the cultivar you bought, the espresso coffee tree, for example, is above that. But every ornamental, I should see that. Now, again, if you're planting a conifer or a tree that's growing from seed, you're not going to find that. So you're not going to find it on conservation stock. That you just make sure that the upper root is just at or below the soil surface. But on ornamentals, I'll be able to see that crook. And then water. Now, this is from last year, obviously, but do you see the green ring? I'm really happy with this planting. They watered it because watering is essential for all trees, but for bare root, you absolutely have to do it. And for ornamentals that you're putting in, the 5 foot stock or such, if you want to know a rate, assuming we're not getting rain during the week, It's about 1 gallon of water for every inch caliper. Caliper is the diameter of the tree about 6 inches above the ground. So about 6 inches above the ground, the diameter of that, it'll tell you if you plant a 2 inch tree, it's 2 gallons. If it's a 1 inch tree, 1 gallon. And you want to water them daily for the first 2 weeks. That 5 foot tree you plant is bare root. If we don't get rain, you want to water it every day a little bit. Why? Otherwise, that water runs off. And then after 2 weeks, every other day for a month. And that's the best way to get these watered. All right. Well, back to soils. Well, 45, and this is looking at April and 22, I think it was. So I'm showing you an example. This is not current today. But look at that towards the end of April. Whoa, we're the 48, 51s. Get out there and get planting. We had a few 30s still. And then you look a little later into May, we're hitting the sweet spot. Look at those warm soils. That is just going to encourage tree roots to grow out from that bare root stock. And then the other thing for that same year in May, we had great air temperatures. These are the maximums that I'm showing you. So 60, 70 degrees, that's perfect. Perfect. 60 degrees, that's fine. Encourages the leaf out, but not so fast that they're going to dry up on you. However, in June, look at this. Third week of June. You do not want to be planting trees. You want to make sure everything's been in the ground for a while, the roots have grown out, and the plant has the leaves hardening off so they can tolerate these warm temperatures. And if you plant them in May, they should be able to. But the problem we have is we have a narrow window for planting bare root stock. Now, it changes every year a little bit, of course, but we have a lot of the year that stop, red light, don't plant. And in South Dakota, we cannot fall plant bare root stock. Not enough success that I would recommend it. You might get away with it, but our falls can be rather brief and our winters rather brutal. So while a lot of area of the country, Michigan where I lived, we could bare root in the fall. No, not here. Well, once we get into April, we've got yellow light, a little bit of caution. Why? Because don't start before the soil temperatures are getting at 45, 50 degrees, because you need that the minute you put them in the ground. Don't say, well, it'll be that next week. What are they going to do this week then in the ground? They're going to sit there, dry up. So I know it's always tough for the districts to schedule work and all that. I'm sympathetic to that. And I know they spend a lot of time thinking this over. But again, make sure you've got the right soil temperatures. And then usually by the end of April, all through May, we've got perfect conditions. It's a green, it's a go. And even into June. Now, we've had some cool Junes where it goes later, but as a general statement, I'll put a yellow caution till the middle of June because I've seen great growing conditions into the middle of June and I've seen it change. And usually by the end of June, certainly July and the rest of the year, it's a red light. It stops. So districts get very busy. And if you're planting bare root stock, get to those nurseries, get the stock when it comes in, plant it during this time period. You'll find at some places they'll be having a sale on their bare root stock in July. Buying dead stuff is not a bargain any month of the year. So get the stock in time, get it in the ground during this window, and you'll have great success. And again, look at it as a guideline, not an absolute. As I say, I've seen we're able to start earlier in April, and I've seen we're able to go later in June as well. But again, the rule is don't start until you get those soil temperatures where you want them to be. And this is where they're at right now. Okay. We've got some places, West River, where we're hitting it. But you look at East River in particular, no, we've got a little ways to go. Now, again, the way the weather's going, it might be mid-April this year. And things could cool down quite a bit as well. So again, keep watching this. I put it in the pest alert every week now, so you can watch it. But we'll see. We may be 3 or 4 weeks away still. And when you get them, keep them in the box. Bare root stock dries out very quickly. Leave the stock in any container as long as possible. If you're buying trees as large trees, make sure they're wrapped in some moist material, shingle tow, shredded fibers, mulch, something to keep that root system wet. You cannot let it dry out. Really important is how it was kept over the winter and then how it's being stored for the point of sale. In other words, how's the nursery, the district taking care of it? Now, districts are very good and so are nurseries, but ideal is temperatures about 33, 36 degrees above freezing with 95% humidity. And that works extremely well. You'll hold the material, but now you've got material that's like fish. You can only keep them there so long. Check the material, make sure it's all still green in there. Check the bare root material. It probably won't have this much soil on it, but nevertheless, check it. But I am going to give you a caution. If you're getting stock that has mold on it, if it's just a little bit of mold here and there, that's not a major concern. But if it's really moldy, it's not that the mold is harming the roots. What the mold is telling you, it was kept too warm in the cooler. And it was too warm in the cooler, that means the roots were drying out. Mold is your indicator that there's a problem. Now, again, if there's just a little bit of mold here and there, because of the moisture in that case, don't worry about it. But if you're getting a lot of stock where there is just this fuzzy mold all over it, you might want to be careful because it may have been kept at too warm a temperatures, just warm enough to grow good mold, but too warm for roots to really survive or keep them from desiccating. So watch it. It's a warning to you rather than something just to ignore. And then some trees, the most common are the oaks, the hackberries, and the hawthorns. If you buy them bare root, you have to sweat them, or you should sweat them. Reason is the buds will not expand unless they go through a little bit of sauna. Now, that's not a requirement for container plants, for example. But if you buy a bare root tree at a nursery or the districts are putting them in for windbreaks, you want to put them in a bundle in a shaded area. Pole barn's great. Place mulch over the roots, but cover the whole thing, top and bottom, in plastic. Okay, after you water them, you created a mini sauna. And usually the temperature is going to be in the 60s or so. What that does is it gets the buds to start breaking. Because think of that. They've gone from a cool, moist environment. And if you had them outside today at 80 degrees, that's a shock to these plants. Other plants can tolerate it, but not these. Some maize, we have cool, moist conditions all May, and you don't need to sweat them. But many years you do. So get them covered. When the buds start to expand, you can plant them. But I'll tell you too, the longer you leave them in that box, that's a sweater as well. So for the districts, that box is very valuable to hold the stock until it goes into the ground. And as I remember, we are planting more container, and then some trees do better in containers. Larch, for example, that's one that just seems to have a better survival rate in a container rather than bare root, but a very valuable windbreak tree and actually a nice ornamental. Ideal times for planting. If the crew doesn't like the weather conditions because they're too wet, damp, perfect for the trees. Um, Worst situation is hot, sunny, and windy. Today would be horrible. Conifers, 65 degrees or lower is best. 75 is kind of your upper window with wind speeds less than 20 miles an hour. You'd be amazed at how fast these plants dry out when you get too high of air temperatures. That's one of the problems with June planting. You can start getting some pretty hot days and some pretty windy days, and it just sucks the moisture out of them. And again, you want those warm soil temperatures. Now, you got to keep them wet. You got to keep them moist before you plant them. Remember, those root systems are going to dry out, but don't hold them in water too long. Again, they're roots, they breathe, so they need oxygen, but you got to keep them damp at least. And then planting depth. I've been surprised the number of times I've gone out and looked at a new belt going in, and I'm actually able to pull needles out of the soil. Just like the bare root trees going in your yard, the bare root trees going in windbreaks, planting depth is critical. Do not plant too deep. Don't plant too shallow either. I want to see that upper root right at the soil surface. I do not want to see roots sticking above the ground, nor do I want to see needles and branches below ground. And admittedly, you're looking at a fairly narrow too high, too low when you're dealing with seedlings. But even with seedlings, planting depth is absolutely critical. Otherwise, they're going to dry out. All right. Is your new windbreak fit? I just came up with that yesterday. What do I mean by fit? Fabric, irrigation, and tubes. I'm quite serious, everyone. If I go out and look at a windbreak and it's got fabric, you've got drip irrigation, you got tubes, you got a windbreak that's going to make it. Can you do it without fabric irrigation tubes? Absolutely. But this is what you do if you're really looking at high survival and rapid establishment. So let's look at a fit windbreak. Well, fabric is one of those things. Um, the ideal world, you wouldn't have to use it, but here we do. We need good grass control for the first 5 years. Now, for everyone looking at putting a tree in their yard, they're discouraging more of the use of fabric underneath the mulch. Instead, what they prefer is a higher mulch layer, maybe 6, even 8 inches of mulch to smother any weeds that may be coming up. Obviously, you don't want grass there, but so take that out. But putting a mulch directly on it, and the reason for that is gas exchange. That they're finding some of the fabrics, particularly plastic. By that, just the ordinary plastic, not the woven fabric you're seeing here, prevents gas exchange. You may have read about that in the last month. But for windbreaks, we're using woven, and it's actually essential. We need it for the first 5 years. That plant has to guard space. But I also want to remind you that think of that air temperature on that little tree on a hot day. It is just warming up. So again, you need moisture on these things because that air temperature, because of coming off that fabric, these are warm and giving off a tremendous amount of moisture. And eventually the fabric can actually end up being embedded into the trunk of the tree. Now, that's with landscapes or windbreaks. Here, that's an 8-year-old spruce, and I could barely cut the fabric out in this windbreak. Seems like 8 to 12 years is where we start seeing the problem with the fabric. So check it at year 4 for those windbreaks and either recut that hole or tear out the fabric because you don't need it anymore. You need it for the first 4 or 5 years. But don't pull it out by year 10 or be careful. Why? That entire root system is right up next to the soil surface. You pull the fabric off in year 12 and we have a drought, you'll kill the trees. So do it while they're relatively young. Again, that 4 or 5 year time period where they needed the protection with the fabric, and after that you don't. And again, with landscape, I really suggest you get rid of all the sod around the tree and then use mulch and maybe a deeper layer mulch than putting fabric or certainly plastic underneath the tree. Now, the fabric is supposed to degrade with sunlight exposure, and it will as long as it's exposed to sunlight. And with deciduous steers, it'll degrade and tear as the trunk gets bigger. But not so with conifers. And we often get soil going over them. So what do we recommend? Cutting that rather than a small slit that used to be done, cutting an X, cutting a J, cutting an L, cutting a patch even if you want, is what's needed to give that trunk more time to expand and again allow that fabric to degrade more. This was almost perfect. They just took patches right out of it, and that works extremely well. But we still can have dying roots, and that's the lack of irrigation. Irrigation is critical, particularly in these crazy years we're having where we get 2 months of moisture and then somebody shuts the faucet off. Yeah, you can put a bucket as this guy did next to each of the trees and put the water in. But for windbreaks, not only do you have to water them where they go in, I'm seeing more and more districts going to drip irrigation. And drip irrigation is great for windbreaks. If I want to see one that's successful, particularly these last couple of years, I'm looking at irrigation. The emitter you're using is fairly small, half a gallon to 1 gallon emitters on these things. And yes, the hose is above the fabric, not below it typically. And the emitters at each plant, so you're not trying to water between the plants, and that helps reduce weeds. And typically what we're looking at is about 8 to 16 gallons a week for the first 2 years. Now, again, it depends on the rain, depends on whether you're East River or West River. Certainly need more West River. And with a 1 gallon emitter, that's about 4 hours, 3 times a week. So the irrigation's on about 4 hours, 3 times a week. The water is trickling in at a 1 gallon emitter, and obviously you'd use a half gallon and just double the time. But man, does that get recovery. Now, the drip, you'd like it on for about the first 8 years. If you said 5 years, I'm okay with that. Really, you see where I'm going with this. That first 5 years is critical. And here's one still being irrigated. Look at the size of the plants. Yeah, you can tell it's a drought. Look at the grass around these plants. But who cares? It's grass. All the plants look luscious. They were getting 2 gallons an hour for 12 gallons a week at this size. So I'm really pleased at the amount of drip irrigation going into windbreaks. And I'm not telling you can't have success without it, but I can tell you you're really guaranteeing success if you do it. So fit, fabric, irrigation, and tubes. Um, Tubes are great as well. Fabric and irrigation and tubes are all temporary by that, you need them for 5 years to 8 years or so. But for that time period, they really, really, really help. Um, one thing they really help with is deer. Uh, don't use 4 foot tubes. 4 foot tubes are like snow cones for deer. The top of the plant will be above it and they just nibble it off. And what you can see here is actually different tube sizes. The 4 footers, the plants weren't getting any taller. The 5 footers, you're actually seeing trees coming out of it. And the ones that didn't tube at all, look at this. Deer love hackberry. Hackberry and oak. If you say, I don't have enough deer in my windbreak, hackberry and oak, plant them. Don't use a tube. You're making a buffet. And look at that. Now, I get calls from people. Well, I planted them 8 years ago and they're only a foot tall. That's because they're lunch and they're just being nibbled every year. So tubes are a great way, and that was one of the original uses of tubes. But the tubes also create a mini greenhouse, and you really accelerate the growth of these plants. So they speed up establishment as well as reduce problems with deer, and to a degree, bunnies as well, of course. But yeah, here's one. This one had not grown for years, and you can see why. It's been nibbled all the time. So this is what I call a deer snow cone. You've got everything right about it, height level, and they're just happy. Again, 4 foot tubes is perfect for that. You can see it, but you start increasing the tube height to 5 feet. Now, I know deer could reach that, but they don't seem to do as much, and you'll actually get the tree growing. So I'm a big fan of 5 foot tubes out there. And again, oaks, the same problem. Look at that. They've just browsed them to the ground. 4 foot tubes browsed them, did a bad job, but 5 foot tubes, they're growing out of them. And so tubes are fantastic. Now, the other thing, don't remove the tubes too early. Yes, they are temporary, but I want that to fill the tube because it's going to take a while for that tree to adapt to that swaying top. You remove them too early, the whole tree will just bend over. So leave them on. This is perfect. Excellent windbreak here. You can see the size of the tree. Look at how much it's filling that tube. He's getting to the point he can remove those tubes now because if you look back at this, we got a fair amount of canopy above that tube that has been swaying a little bit. So we got a fairly strong stem at this point. And yeah, you can remove them, but that's what we really want to see in the tube is that size. Now, there is a problem with leaving them in the tube. And that's the fact that that swaying can end up damaging the trunk, as you see here. Now, you can do a couple of things. You can get tubes that the top of them are rounded and much softer. You can also, as this guy did, now he did this after that damage, not before it. He just put a little foam around it so that the stem could hit the side of the tube while it was strengthening. Um, vents, the vent should be along the top, by the way, just to let you know. And I would use vented tubes in anything more than 4 foot tall. So if you're putting 5 foot tubes, make sure they're vented. Vents go on top, not on the bottom. Some people use T-posts. I know it's hard to predict what a deer will do, but they do like to rub on that T-post because it's really stable, and that's not good for your trees. And don't improvise with a stake for these things. You're going to be disappointed. Tree's going to fall over. I like these fiberglass poles, tough, a little bit of flex, enough that the deer can't really get a good rub on them, but they'll hold the tree up generally. I mean, deer are crazy. I've seen them do just about everything. And there you go. Now, the great debate, there's a lot of debates out there. One debate is the toilet paper roll go towards the wall or does it turn away from the wall? Yes, that's a debate. Another debate is, does the stake go inside the tube or does it go outside the tube? You could go either way. I've seen some good arguments for both cases. I tend to like it outside the tube. But again, having the staked properly is the key thing. But tubes are great, and this one here is off to an excellent start. So I did want to save some time for this, and we went over bare root. We'll discuss some of the other planting methods at a later session as well. So thank you for participating or watching or getting ready for the planting season. I know we're a little ahead. We'll see what April brings. There's my email address and my cell phone number. I always appreciate Tony for doing all the everything behind the curtain, if you will, of helping to get this organized and doing it, and then getting our binge watching set up for those of you that want to go out and watch a lot of these. So oops, I can get that. So I'll click that one off. And Tony, do we have any questions?
I see a couple questions here in the chat. Thank you to all those ISA arborists for submitting your credentials. If you are an SAF forester or an ISA arborist who has yet to do so, please do so before the call is over. But our first question
Oh,
comes,
Tony, I
yes,
apologize. I am gonna ask this, and you always ask good questions too. Is it a windbreaker or shelter belt? And take a poll. One of the other things I guess I would like to see, and Tony would as well, is if any of you have suggestions on topics you would like us to cover. Please add that to the chat box as well, so we make sure we're providing information that you want. So with that, go ahead, Tony. What's the questions?
sure. Carter's curious about getting a shipment of bare root stock from a nursery and putting that in a gravel bed over the winter, or should they be planted when they are dormant?
Okay, well, now did he say putting them in a gravel bed for the winter? In other words, he got them in the fall? I wasn't sure I understood the question.
That's how I understand it, over winter. Yep. Put
Oh,
them in a
okay.
gravel bed over the winter.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Maybe I'll think of it this way. He bought the bare root stock in the spring of year one, put it in a gravel bed, which it overwintered in,
Hmm.
and then was planted into the next year. I'm thinking that might be it. But gravel bed overwintering can work, but not for all species. Oaks perform very poorly that way. Maples perform fairly well. So if you are looking at doing that, um, email me. I'll send you the list of trees to which gravel bed as a storage for overwintering is not really advised, and the large list of plants to which, yes, you can do. For the rest of you, what do gravel beds do? It allows you to plant bare root stock actually during the summer, oddly enough. You leave them in the gravel, you pull them up bare root. Now you quickly plant them, but cities will often say, well, we got the bare root stock in, but we're too busy. We're going to plant them in the summer, and you can if you design your gravel beds correctly. So good question.
Our next question comes from, oh, I lost it here. There we are. From Jennifer. She's curious. How are soil temperatures measured? And I just in the chat responded about checking out the Mesonet program, the regional Mesonet program. But perhaps you can go into a little more specifics how we get those measurements, those temperature measurements.
And that's good. It's the Mesonet where we get all this data from. That's run through South Dakota State University. Now they measure soil temperatures. They got probes, and they got them at weather stations across the state, and they measure it in bare soil and at sod at 4 inches, which is really where we want to measure the soil temperatures. And so, but again, it's one spot in one area, and you don't know the soil texture, and that's going to have an influence as well. So they're general guidelines rather than absolutes. But if you look at all the reporting stations in your county or around your county, and the soil temperatures are all at about 50, you're probably pretty safe. I use sod as it's going to take a little longer to warm up. So I use sod rather than bare soil. But if you say, well, I've got a windbreak where the soil's already been turned, so it's exposed, those soils will warm up a little faster.
Now, Andrew's curious. He's had a discussion with a farmer and is curious if anybody has used or if it's viable to use corn bales for mulch over new trees.
I'm assuming what he's looking at is using that as a mulch around the trees, kind of as their
Correct.
typical mulch. I've seen some people do it. I've seen some people use soybean the same way. From what I've seen, the soybean seems to hold better. The corn seems to blow, but yeah, it'd be interesting to find what other people's experiences are for Andrew. Um, because, like I said, I've seen them both, but the soybean's kind of wiry and seems to hold better. The corn sometimes blows away, but otherwise, no, it's organic mulches are always good.
Awesome. Well, Deanna's curious if training on a drip system as far as how many feet you can do before you need to do something different to continue water pressure.
Ah, I've talked with Nathan K for our agroforest, and I said, Nathan, we've got to do a workshop this spring because you're asking a great question. What you need to have is you need to have the pressure equalized along your entire line, your main and your laterals. And there are formulas to follow on that, and it's not rocket science. But I'll be chatting with Nathan, and hopefully we'll have a couple of spots. And I know Nathan's got one that's going in that we could have a workshop for those of you that are interested in drip irrigation, and for those who have used it to give your experience as well, because I'm seeing it becoming more and more popular. But I can't answer that question like, well, it's always this. It's a lot easier saying, here's the tables, here's how you follow it, here's what we need to do. So that's what a workshop would do.
Now, Joel's curious, how about bare root trees that are transplanted into a pot? Can those be planted throughout the growing season?
Yes, we call that containerized. It actually has a term. That means what you've done is you've taken a bare root tree and placed it into a container. Now, the only thing I'd mention to that, having done that when I used to work for landscapes and all that, is if you're going to put it in a pot, is make sure you leave in that pot the spring at least a month or so the roots grow out into the surrounding soil, so that when you pull it out of the pot, it comes as a soil ball. So if you left them in the pot, you say, well, it's now July, August, and you're planting them then, that's going to be fine. Or even fall, you could plant them because they're container. But don't containerize them and then 3 weeks later pull them out of the container because they're just starting to get the root system established. But yes, that's commonly done, and it's called containerized.
I see another question here. Brandy's curious about these crazy temperature swings. Is that going
Yeah.
to impact pruning trees and shrubs here in the spring? She typically waits till early April.
And I do too, but I'll tell you, the way this is going, this weekend would be a perfect time to get out and do it. I don't think we're going to be too early. We're getting close enough to that time anyway. So yeah, I think we've got a window here right now. And I would certainly get out there now. A reminder, everybody, that it's a good time of year to just to do a lot of pruning. But if it's a spring flowering shrub, no, because all the flower buds for your lilacs, your forsythias, and that are already set. They were set last fall. So any pruning you do this spring is going to reduce the amount of blooms. Those we wait until after they finish flowering. But for your summer flowering shrubs, your Bomulda spireas, your hydrangeas and that, now's the perfect time to do pruning.
Perfect. Well, that seems to be the questions that have come in, and as I say that, another one pops up. So that's perfect.
Always
Andrew's
happens.
curious, how about trimming apple trees? Is now okay or too late?
No, it's not too late, Andrew. In fact, with these ups and down temperatures, that is something I would get out and do this weekend. Any of your fruit trees, if you haven't gotten to them yet because you didn't know where the temperatures were going, now's a good time. Remember, now we have less fire blight pressure than any other time of the year, so it's a good time to get out and prune if you're concerned about that. But if you're out there training your apple trees, yeah, this weekend, and we're going to have a slight cool down after this, would be a great time to get out there and do your pruning.
Wonderful. Well, I'll make one more call for any of the ISA or SAF uh, credentials if you are interested in those. I believe I'm up to speed in the chat box. Let's see, we have about 18 or so ISA certified
Oh,
arborists on this week. Thanks for joining us, y'all.
yeah.
90 folks on the call, another great turnout. We're thrilled to have you join us each month as we get into the growing season here. We plan to go monthly moving forward. So join us or look for an invitation to our April workshop where we're going to be talking about foliar diseases, if I'm not mistaken, and what treatments to start then. So look for that workshop in the coming weeks or that invitation in the coming weeks. And we're thrilled for you having us. Dr. Ball, any last words?
Nope, that's it. Our April one will cover a little bit more than that, but he's right. The thing I said is that we ought to cover foliar diseases because that is the time for treatment. Update on EAB a little bit will be done as well. But as I said, put in the chat box if there's something you would like to see this year that we do. We are more than interested in any suggestions you might have. So toss them in the chat box as well. Otherwise, nope, I'll sign off. So thank you again, Tony, for your great job. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.